Podcasting from the beautiful state of Maine, welcome to another episode of the Learning from Leaders podcast, the show that focuses on identifying and developing the skills and behaviors that will inspire, empower, and compel others to follow your lead. Listen as Patrick's guests talk about the powerful leadership approaches they have identified and developed, which are vital for leading in today's challenging times. These are the same approaches that will positively impact you as a leader too. Learning from Leaders provides the right balance of leadership research with real-world scenarios, making it easy for you to rise above your best. All right, let's start the show.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining on another episode of Learning from Leaders. I'm Patrick Verino, and in this episode, we're going to talk about how the most effective listeners are those that know how to multitask. And I know you're probably thinking, wait a minute, everything that I've heard about multitasking and listening should not go together. And I'm going to outline what that actually looks like to multitask when you're listening. So let's get into it. On episodes before, you have heard me talk about listening as a superpower, and I truly believe listening is a superpower. In the cables model that I work from, the L in that model, the L cable in that model stands for listening. And I talk about listening in 4 different ways. And that's what I mean about multitasking, is that to be effective at listening, we have to listen in 4 different ways to truly connect with somebody else. And again, I say it's a superpower because I think of all the things that we can do in terms of how we behave, to listen, to truly listen is probably one of the hardest things we can do and the most valuable. I think too often right now, what we find is that many of us at our least effective ways of listening is that we listen to respond. Worse is when we listen to undermine. But what we need to try and do really is work on how do we listen to understand? How do we listen in a way that when somebody else is talking to us, we're fully present to them so that they know that when they're speaking that they have our full attention, that we're not there listening to them so that we can formulate our response, which is listening to respond, or that we're worse, getting ready so that we can tell them how dumb their ideas are, or maybe they are, for whatever belief or thought they might have. So when we talk about listening from the standpoint of multitasking, we talk about listening with our ears, with our eyes, with our mind, and with our heart. So the first part of this is when we listen with our eyes. When we listen with our eyes, we're looking at body language, facial expressions. 2 people that I will often reference. One is a woman named Susan Ibbotts, who runs a company called Human Behavior Lab. And the other is a gentleman named Joe Navarro, who wrote a book called What Everybody is Saying. And both of them are experts in the area of reading body language and facial expressions and micro expressions. And they talk about how our bodies, our autonomic nervous system will oftentimes give away what they call tells, that they will give away bits of information to let us know what's going on with the other person. You know, an example of that might be somebody that gets red in the face. They can't control that. That's the autonomic nervous system. Or somebody that might try and self-soothe or try and relax when they're feeling nervous and they start to rub the front of their legs, or they start to grab the side of their face, or pull on their earlobe when they're having a conversation. Those are all tells, things that you might notice in somebody else, that maybe you're having a conversation with somebody and all of a sudden they start to do one of these things when you ask them a certain question. Maybe when they're in a conversation with you, they're not really looking toward you. Their feet are kind of pointed away from you. That could indicate that they're not interested in your conversation. You're making them uncomfortable, a number of different things. What's interesting is that in the work that Joe Navarro mentions, he talks about the feet as being one of the most important cues for recognizing the body language of somebody else. It's not the eyes, which is what most of us think about, especially when it's around telling the truth or not. We have the ability to do this with anybody that's around us, especially if it's somebody that we know quite well, the next time that you're around them, be very aware of maybe a time when they're angry. What are they doing with their feet or with their arms, or what way is their body positioned? What does their face look like? What type of expressions are they making when they're angry? Now do the same thing when they're in a really good mood. Be observant. Look at those things. Because that's how you start to develop this ability to read other people. You'll start to be able to pick up on certain cues. The more you do it, the more comfortable and the easier it will become. And it's an important component. We talk about it often in terms of emotional intelligence, that it's about awareness of others. Well, part of that is looking at somebody, what are they doing? The better we are at that, the better we are at listening, because we can see if there are inconsistencies between what somebody says and what they're doing. So the next we talk about listening with our ears. And when we listen with our ears, we're listening for the obvious things, right? The words that somebody says. Word choice is important here too, especially if it's somebody that you know quite well and all of a sudden they start using words that they don't normally use, that's not normally in their vocabulary. It could say that that word has more meaning than it would normally have if somebody else said it, because that's not something that that person would normally say. We can also listen for the tone in which somebody says something, the speed at which somebody is talking to us. That's also important. What words do they emphasize? And I'll give you a quick example. I could say a simple sentence of, I didn't take your book. But if I say, I didn't take your book, probably means somebody else did, but I didn't take it. Or if I didn't take your book, I took somebody else's book. Or if I say, I didn't take your book, I took your computer, I took your wallet, but I didn't take your book. The sentence is the same in terms of the words, but the word that I emphasize or how I say that sentence has completely different meanings, 3 at least. That's why it's so important for us to be listening with our ears. And again, you can do this with people you know to start practicing this. When somebody's angry, listen to their tone of voice. When they're upset, when they're happy, how do they speak? You'll start to see that there are patterns. There are different ways that people speak, and it's really important for us to recognize those and understand. That's how we develop this muscle of being able to really listen when somebody else is speaking. So the next is we listen with our mind. And I will always reference this in regards to Stephen Covey in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. He talks about seeking first to understand rather than to be understood. To me, this is where listening with our mind comes into play. That when somebody says something, that before I might react to it, especially if it's something I find was maybe offensive to me, or something that I think somebody is trying to be offensive to me, I might take a step back and say, what else could this mean? Is what they're saying really what they mean? Rather than me just jumping into reaction mode, I'm going to take a step back. I'm going to pause. Lastly, it's around listening with our heart. And that really is as simple as imagining what it would be like to be in the other person's shoes. If I was having this conversation with them, how would I want them to listen to me? Would I want them to really be present and listen to me rather than be looking at what else is going on or trying to multitask in a negative way that they're looking at their phone or their computer as I'm trying to talk to them? No, I'm going to want this person to really be listening to me. So when we talk about this multitasking in listening, there are 4 things that we do when we multitask, when we listen. We listen with our eyes, we listen with our ears, we listen with our mind, and we listen with our heart. And when we do that, think of scenarios. I do a lot of work around conflict. And if you think about listening in all 4 of those components, multitasking that way when we listen, you're probably going to provide a much better opportunity for you to understand what's really going on with the other person. Because if I'm really listening, I'm listening to the words that they say. What are they saying right now? I'm watching their body language. How are they acting when they say it? I'm listening from the perspective of what might this really mean? If they're angry, what is it potentially that's creating this anger in them? Or their displeasure, whatever that might be. And then lastly, listening with my heart with them, I'm saying, what if I was in their shoes right now? Would I be feeling the same way? All 4 of those provide opportunities for us to gain so much more information in regards to what really the issues might be. And for any of us that's been in that position where we've been around somebody that we truly feel like they're listening to us, what does it do to us? Oftentimes I will tell you, if I'm upset about something, but I feel like the other person is truly trying to listen, genuinely trying to listen to my perspective or what I've been dealing with, it automatically reduces my level of frustration or anger because I feel like this person truly is trying to take the time to see things from my perspective. It's the same thing when we're doing it for somebody else. When we multitask and listen in this way, we oftentimes have the ability to reduce the amount of tension that goes on. Because the other person can feel, right, that you truly are trying to listen to understand. You're not listening to undermine. You're not listening just to respond. You're listening to understand. And all of that requires us to be curious as we listen. There are so many opportunities to, I would say, not only eliminate or address issues we have with others, but I think truly to avoid many issues before they become issues when we multitask our listening. I hope you found this short episode helpful. I think, again, this skill, this behavior of listening truly is a superpower, and it's one that we all can continue to develop. And when we do that, we build better relationship bridges. And those are the things that we travel all day long. I'll challenge you to find some time during the next day or two and ask yourself when you wake up in the morning, how can I be a better listener today? How can I maybe focus just on listening with my eyes or listening with empathy? Break it down. Just work on a piece of that multitasking to start with so that you can put it all together and really be so effective in terms of how you listen to other people. We can do better. I look forward to our next episode together, and I'm confident you'll be able to go out there and rise above your best.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Learning from Leaders podcast. If you've enjoyed the show, please feel free to rate, review, and subscribe on your preferred podcast listening platform. We really appreciate that effort. Until next time, keep rising above your best as a leader.